Greetings and salutations, friends, and welcome back to more Warhammer Fantasy lore. It's been a while since we've covered anything that isn't humans or orcs in fantasy, and it's been the longest while since we've covered the nice little elvies. So let's get back to it with the classical high elves, because what could possibly be more adorable than a pompous, haughty, arrogant son of a bitch elf with pointy ears? Although today we are going to be looking at one of the few rare working men amongst high elves, the White Lions. The White Lions are an elite division of the High Elf army that also serves as the Phoenix King's personal bodyguards and house guard, a quite literally royal guard. And if the Phoenix King ever has need for such a thing, the White Lions are also usually the ones that will serve as the Phoenix King's champions in any honor duels or other such bouts. Occasionally, of course, the Phoenix King might want to represent himself. On other occasions, he might have family members he would rather have represent him. But failing that, the Phoenix King's champion will almost certainly be the captain of his White Lion Guard. And considering the White Lions' reputation and their rather stringent requirements for entry, he is likely to be a pretty damn good fighter in his own right. And speaking of that, you might wonder how they came to be the Phoenix King's personal bodyguard, because you might think that would be a task for a more prestigious military organization. Perhaps the Dragon Princes of Caledor, for example, might make up an elite royal guard of shock cavalry. Or perhaps an elite unit of spearmen. After all, the High Elves are rightly famed for their spearmen being some of the best in the Warhammer world. Or maybe something a little bit more magical, perhaps, like the Everqueen's Guard. So why would the Phoenix King make his guard a bunch of axe-wielding elves? Because you might already have noticed, they have massive two-handed axes. Not a very elvish weapon at all. They prefer the more elegant weapons, like long master-crafted swords or spears. An axe is seemingly far too brutish a weapon for the elegant elves, not to mention the simple fact that an axe is a blunt instrument in all due practicality. It is a weapon that requires a great deal of strength to wield effectively, as it has a large cutting edge, designed for smashing apart enemies and cutting large gaping holes in the enemy, rather than hitting with pinpoint precision or cutting open minute arteries like a sword or a spear. It is a weapon designed to cleave through armor, rather than snake its way around it, as most high elf weapons are. And you might think that that is not a weapon that's very well suited for a high elf, being somewhat lacking in upper body strength, as they after all are. But there is a story behind why the White Lions became the king's bodyguards. And it starts, like all good stories do, with a betrayal. This was around the time when Malekith decided that he was supposed to be the boss, and had most of the High Elf nobility viciously assassinated. However, as we all know, when he wandered into the flames that would normally ordain his rule as Phoenix King, poor little Malekith was roasted slowly like a marshmallow and spat out the other end. Unsurprisingly, being char-broiled slowly over a fire had its effect on Malekith, and he retreated northward with his followers, leaving the High Elves with an opportunity to regroup. And the first thing they'd have to do was elect a new ruler, and since pretty much everyone that was available and, well, qualified for the job had been assassinated, that left them with Caledor the Dragon Tamer's grandson, who was also named Caledor, and he was currently nowhere near the capital. In fact, he was currently hunting in Thrace. This was a small problem because that's a bit of a distance from the place he needs to be in to actually be crowned Phoenix King, and, well, there is the small matter of a civil war slowly but surely spreading its way across Ulthuan. Not the best time of year for travelling, but, well, there was no option. The messenger eventually reached Calidor and bade him come to the Shrine of Assyrian, where he too would try to pass through the fire and hopefully not get turned into a well-cooked marshmallow, and then be crowned Phoenix King. And again, to absolutely no one's fucking surprise whatsoever, the roads turned out to not be entirely safe. Now, normally, a up-and-coming Phoenix King is going to be accompanied by a fair bit of heavy armor to make sure that he doesn't get stabbed to death on the path to becoming a Phoenix King. Unfortunately, Calidor was but the Dragon Tamer's grandson. He was way, way down on the list of succession, and the people who were supposed to potentially succeed the last king were all in the capital at the conclave where they were supposed to decide on the next king, where Malekith had decided that fuck democracy, I'm just going to kill everyone to death. So the usual royal bodyguard was understandably distracted, and hell, even if they weren't, they couldn't possibly make it to Thrace quickly enough to meet up with His Majesty-to-be. And so it was, in all due honesty, quite unavoidable that somewhere along the long and treacherous road would be a band of Dark Elves preparing for a spot of surprise butt sex against the young prince. Fortunately for said prince, however, while the Dark Elves were quite busy trying to take away one or more of his virginities with various piercing objects, a group of unlikely heroes came upon this rather disturbing battle scene. A group of Thracian woodsmen came out of the nearby woods and set upon the Dark Elves' assassin, and managed to defeat them all in close-quarters combat using their large wood-cutting axes. A feat in and of itself. Dark Elf assassins tend to be rather frisky little bastards. But then again, catching a wood-cutting axe to the back of the neck tends to take the frisky out of most people, even Dark Elves. And after dispatching these assassins, the woodsman took the young prince through various woodland paths away from the main highway. The Dark Elf assassins, which were sprinkled quite liberally along the various paths to the Shrine of Assyrian, had no knowledge of these paths, and while on several occasions the woodsmen had to avoid patrols of not entirely loyal elves, they did indeed manage to bring the young prince to the Shrine of Assyrian without any further of his virginities being threatened by Dark Elves' knives. As you can readily imagine, the young prince, now Phoenix King, was very thankful to the Thracian woodsman for having saved him from being stabbed to death. Or, well, in all due honesty, the Dark Elves probably wouldn't have just stabbed him to death. They are far too inventive for that, so the prince was probably even more thankful than he truly realized. And in classic noble style, instead of simply handing the brave band of lumberjacks a massive, bulging coin purse filled with all manners of precious metals, which they probably would have appreciated quite a bit since at this point they were but simple lumberjacks who were probably having a fairly hard time feeding their families, considering that all of the routes in and out of their various settlements, which would normally be bringing food and tradable goods, were currently being camped to death by large bands of fetishists Dark Elves that had a nasty habit of stabbing and murdering everything that tried to get past them. Instead of this more reasonable reward, the newly crowned Calidor I decided to grant the lumberjacks a slightly different reward by saying that, hey, you seem to enjoy putting your lives at risk for me, so how about you make a profession out of it? And since in a monarchy it is not generally accepted to tell a monarch to go fuck himself, the ex-lumberjacks had to prepare themselves for a fate of repeated stabbings, which they undoubtedly saw as a great honour. In actual fact, all joking aside, they probably did see it as a considerable honour. Being named the personal bodyguards of the Phoenix King was pretty damn important to the High Elves, considering that the Phoenix King is considered at least partially to be a bit of a deity amongst the High Elves. And of course, there's the simple fact that even in our own human history, we tend to be quite fond of people with shiny hats, and very few people indeed have a shinier hat than the Phoenix King. And regardless of the feelings of the original lumberjacks, these days the position of White Lions is a prestigious one indeed. And if you're wondering about why they're named White Lions and not simply Great White Lumberjacks, well, partially, Games Workshop would have a hard time selling that in the modern SJW environment, and secondly, it is due to the very large pussycats that wander the lands of Thrace. And while of course the original band of White Lions were given their positions by directly saving the king, people can't just simply sit around waiting for the king to be ambushed by dark elves all the time. That would be a rather nebulous and complicated initiation ceremony, and of course it might prove a little bit counterproductive to keep putting the sovereign's life at risk just so you can recruit more bodyguards. So another way had to be found. Well, first and foremost, of course, the White Lions are supposed to be an elite band of the finest fighters in the High Elves' armies, so first and foremost, someone would have to do something pretty damn interesting on the battlefield to be considered for the position of a White Lion. Some act of suitable valor or courage, or just good old-fashioned suicidal nut-jobbiness, which could potentially qualify an individual to stand between His Highness and a sharp pointy object. Secondly, this being the Warhammer universe, which is populated by all manners of fanged and monstrous beasties, you need a second unreasonable objective. And since the White Lions of Chrace have taken their names after the giant white pussycat that terrorizes the area, it is only natural that an aspiring White Lion should go out and murder one of these majestic beasts purely so that he can skin the poor creature and wear it as a cloak. 'Cause fuck you, World Wildlife Foundation. That's why. And while you might originally think that bringing down a single pussycat shouldn't be too much of a problem for an experienced elven warrior clad head to toe in elven platemail and carrying a gigantic fuck-off axe, these pussycats are the size of horses, and have a fair bit of strength on them. In fact, generally speaking, the little bastards can tear through chainmail and even plate armor like it was tissue paper. Add to this the remarkably tough qualities of its hides, which, while not being able to properly stop a two-handed axe, it is at the very least capable of reducing its momentum, which might turn a killing blow into merely a wounding one, and considering you are now 1 meter away from a gigantic cat that wishes to tear your face off with its mouth, merely wounding the cat might be a bad idea. Should the brave High Elf survive the encounter with such a ferocious pussy, however, he will be able to claim its pelt as his own and step into the ranks of the White Lions, an extremely prestigious position, which comes with all of the benefits of being so very, very close to the king, and of course a fair bit of valued and rare wargear. The axes used by the White Lions of Chrace are not exactly the woodcutting instruments they once were. Over the years, the original axes were enchanted with all manners of magical spells and enchantments, and new axes were of course forged as well to exacting standards, making the two-handed axes of the White Lions remarkably light, fantastically strong, and ridiculously sharp. They are, by all standards, master-crafted weapons, the likes of which virtually no other fighting force in the Warhammer world can claim to possess. And a weapon potentially even more fearsome than these two-handed axes is occasionally sought out by the more brave and or foolhardy of High Elves, namely a White Lion itself. Some mages have, on several occasions, tried to enslave lions via various spells, although enslaving a White Lion is a remarkably bad idea. They're very intelligent and very patient creatures that don't take all too well to being collared against their wills, which exposes the High Elf mage to all manners of uncomfortable possibilities, like, for example, waking up one morning without any legs, only then to notice that said missing extremities are quietly and cautiously being nibbled away at by a giant white cat sitting on a silk cushion over in a corner. This high level of intelligence does, however, open up some possibilities, since an intelligent creature might be able to understand the value of a partnership. It also helps that the White Lions are very social and flock-oriented animals to begin with, so it is not beyond the realms of possibility that a persistent, intelligent, and, most importantly of all, brave High Elf might be able to convince the giant pussycat that he would be a better friend than a meal. It is, however, important to note that it is very rare for the actual White Lions, the royal bodyguard, to try and undertake this ritual of bonding, simply because the Phoenix King tends to make his court in relatively civilized areas. And if you're going to make a pet out of a half-a-ton pussycat that can never be entirely tamed, you're going to have some problems with said kitty cat in civilized surroundings. Just because the kitty cat has decided that one high elf is a better friend and food dispenser than a scratching pole does not in any way mean that it isn't going to eat all of the other high elves. Although, while relatively rare, it is far from unheard of. Usually, the White Lions are used in a very specialized role, however, and they are usually isolated from the rest of the division, so to say. For example, the White Lions have, on several occasions, been used to pull chariots. Again, it's not exactly a normal thing, but when one of these massive angry pussycats can be talked into dragging around the chariot carrying a couple of White Lions, it does make for a very, very effective chariot. And individual White Lions and their masters are also usually employed in patrol duties. The Phoenix King, of course, owns vast areas that he uses for both management and, of course, living space that needs to be patrolled. And gigantic kitty cats with hunting instincts are pretty damn good sentinels. Nevertheless, this hunting instinct is still the reason why the White Lions are a bit problematic to civilians. And unfortunately, the possibility of the White Lion deciding to eat someone can't be entirely removed, because the White Lions are not entirely natural beings. Their sheer size, ferocity, and intelligence suggests that they have at least been, to some mild degree, affected by the warp, when chaos rolled over the entire Warhammer world in the earliest days of the planet. Now, do bear in mind that this does not in any way mean that they are creatures of chaos. They are most definitively not. Indeed, the High Elves themselves do not consider the White Lions to be in any way evil, despite the fact that they will quite happily nom-nom on a High Elf should the opportunity present itself, and bands of White Lions have even been known to attack villagers and dine upon the local residents if they get hungry enough, but the High Elves see this as a natural ferocity. The White Lion is certainly a beast to be feared and respected, but it is not an entirely unnatural creature, and again, it is most certainly not a demonic creature, nor is it evil. In all due likelihood, the species was simply affected during the Great Cataclysm and had some minor mutations wrought upon it. So, instead of being limited by the natural intellect and natural size limitations of its species, it grew to be a far larger and far smarter creature than it would be in nature. And while this hyper-intelligent and remarkably hungry kitty cat is a bit of a problem to the local inhabitants of Thrace, it's not too big of an issue. A sturdy wall will in most cases deter the beast, and it will find something easy to nom on, and it is at best a relatively minor problem, considering that Chrace is also haunted by all manners of other beasties that are considerably more, shall we say, indiscriminate in their attacks. And who can, after all, in all due honesty say that they would not want a giant half-ton pussycat for a pet? Until next time, I have been Arch. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope to see you all again soon. Have a good day.